evidence that a jury looks over is to approve or disapprove the further proceedings of the trial. And that's why the what if of what if you didn't do it. Of course, people are sentenced to death, like without doing anything wrong all the time.
It happens. It happens. So before we poo-poo, okay, we know Ganelon is a rotter. All right, is this obvious to us that Ganelon is kind of a jerk? But he says it wasn't treason. I don't think any of us supports having 20,000 people slaughtered because you have a grudge against someone, even if they cheated you out of estate and wealth or whatever. No, it's not okay, Ganelon. But it was a pretty severe punishment they dished out. It was ugly, and it's just interesting to think about the fact that when we in a country like ours punish someone, we all punish him. And it's sobering thought. So anyway, this is my long speech to address the fact that Alex said he gave a lot of thought to whether treason should be a capital offense. And I was answering that we should give these things a lot of thought because we are jointly, corporately responsible for these things. Okay, now I'm going to come around and gather your paper. Several people have already told me that you have technical difficulties. I am having like technical difficulties in my personal self. I have a headache. I'm just not on it today. So I will come back for you, Ethan. Okay. Yes. Yeah, chapters 1 through 7. Yeah, that's you got it. Which that's a better. You know what? You should send me a link to that because I was looking for a good copy. I couldn't find a good one that only had that. And that's why I had everybody get the big book. Yes. You can send it to me. Karsten has already done so. You're good. You already gave me. All right. Okay, I will. It will be like a game for me. I will see if I can find it. Will be exciting. Yes, it does help me if you remember to identify them. Because I don't want to just decide that you didn't do it. And after, a certain number of papers, stop being so good at finding the antithesis and parallelism in everybody's paper. So I don't want to treat you like you didn't do it. But sometimes you didn't do it. So I don't know. Okay. Yes, I feel rather tired and discombobulated today. So forgive me for being not very together. I brought in, and I think some of you have already seen these, but because we're talking about the conquest of Constantinople and the Crusades in the East, I brought in some icons. These are Orthodox icons that I got in Athens. My son and I visited a flea market, which was just too fun. Like, what sort of things do people in Athens put out at a flea market? Some interesting things. And some of them are old icons, which is kind of sad because they're considered, really reverential, sacramental items in the Orthodox Church, and to just put them out like at a garage sale situation is not really the way you're supposed to treat them. I know some Orthodox people who have found a lady I know found an icon at Goodwill, and she called it rescuing. I rescued the icon because it was not in a setting that it should have been. I got them basically because they were really cool and they were from Athens. So this one is obviously Mary and Jesus. There are actually set poses. I don't really know all the names of the various poses, but in this one, there is an angel here holding a cross. And this one has an angel with, I think it's got the sponge with the vinegar that they lifted up to Jesus' lips. And see, in this one, the infant Jesus is looking at the representation of his death to come. And he's kind of holding his mother a little disconcerted because he's fully man. He doesn't want to die a horrible death. He came to die the horrible death, but it's not going to be pleasant. And but so there's other, and they have names for the various positions of Mary and Jesus. Then I brought, this is the Last Supper. I'm not going to take the time to walk around, but you guys can come up afterwards if you want to. Icons are always drawn. The Orthodox say they're written because they are written messages. They are just happen to be pictorial. They're always the same. It's always the moment when Judas is dipping his bread in the dish. And, when Jesus said, the man who dips his bread in the dish with me is the one who will betray me. It's the moment where Judas is making himself known. And they in the Greek, they call it the mystical supper. That's what they call it in the Orthodox. And then this one, since we're getting closer to Christmas, this is the nativity scene. It's always the same. It's in a cave, and Jesus is always in this little box that to me looks very much like a coffin. He's from the beginning. That's what he is. Also, remember what did they put him in? Even though it's coffin-like, what is it? And what's a manger? And what do you put in a feeding trough? And what is Jesus? He's food. He came to be the bread. And we talked, and those of you who had my class last year know that the early church took this very seriously. Communion was for them a vital, important part. When we eat the body of Christ, what happens to food? It becomes you. But when we take communion, we become it. It changes us. It's the food we change into. It's not the food that we change into us. So that feeding trough, who's the food for the world, also looks a bit like a coffin, because that's where this life's going to end up. So anyway, if you want to, on your way out, you can take a look. But this is the Orthodox Church. This is what they were in Constantinople, right? They were Orthodox. And in 1054, we talked about this a little bit, right? In 1054, the two halves of the church split. They already had some theological differences. They had, in the West, they had added some words to the creed, to the Nicene Creed, that they didn't add in the East. And in the East, they said, whoa, dude, you can't just add words to the creed without asking us. And in the West, they said, well, yeah, yes, we can, because we have the Pope. And they said, no, we don't care. You have to do it in a council. You can't just add words. So this was already, they were having a problem with this. But the real last straw came when the Pope sent a representative to Constantinople to try to work things out. And the Patriarch of Constantinople was rather rude to them, because he was also sort of a stiff-necked, hard-nosed kind of guy. And the representatives came in during church service and walked up to the altar and laid a paper excommunicating him. Yeah. And so he turned around and excommunicated the Pope. And it went downhill from there. That was pretty much, yeah. No, it was not diplomatic. And as a matter of fact, then by the time they got there, the Pope had died. It wasn't even legit, because before they served it, the Pope was dead. The Pope who sent them. They should have gone back and gotten new orders but it was just, the whole thing blew up. And it was all because on both sides, people were very snarky and rude and proud. Yes. Yes. So yeah, that's what they did. So this happened in 1054. This is just slightly after the year 1200 that we're reading about. So you got to keep in mind, it's only been 150-ish years that the churches have been separated. So it's, what do I want to say? Like, the wound is still fresh. They still really feel it. There's still grudges being held. You know what? It is my understanding that there are Greek-speaking churches, Orthodox churches, that still think about the book that you're reading, the event that you read about this week, the sack of Constantinople. You wretched Westerners, you came over and burnt our city down. We're a Christian city and you burnt us down. And they still, 800 years later, still say, burnt our city down, which is true. So there's some bad blood there. But 150 years in, there was a lot of bad blood, if you know what I mean. Really, this was fresh, relatively. And they were very still upset about it. So when a European army comes and camps in front of you, a European Roman Catholic army, and you're the other side, it's not good. I've delved into that, but I'd like to step back for a minute and talk about what you're going to write for me. Now, for many of you, everything I'm about to say is old news. But I'm going to do it all from the beginning because for many of you, you've never done one of these before. And yes, it's the same example because it's a good one. And I just print it in the reading guide every year. But if everyone could go to page 55 with me, that would be great. Akreia. So in the ancient world, when they trained people to write, they used a series of exercises called the progymnasmata. And some of you, if you're, people involved in classical education have probably heard this. They started with very simple exercises and they worked up to pretty heavy duty. In their case, often they were speeches instead of written out. That was something they delivered orally. And some of these exercises, first of all, it gives you something different to do and write about. But second of all, they're really training and thinking of something to say, searching your mind, all the nooks and crannies of your mind, for things to use and things to say. Akreia is the progymnasmata exercise that delves into a saying, something someone said. Like take a Ben Franklin proverb or something like that. And I'm trying to think of one. I have a whole book of them at home. Why can I not even think of? Yeah, the early. Is that Ben Franklin?
Yes.
All right. Ben Franklin was smart. So we would take a proverb like that and we would expound on it, but not just however you want. It was a set series of observations that you make. Some of you have done these with me before. So at the top of page 55, I have a list of the parts. Do you see where it says praise for the author, paraphrase the saying, reasons for the saying, contrast? Those are the parts. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this example, and we're going to identify each of the parts. And yours that you're going to write is going to sound very much like this, except you're not writing about the same saying. We're giving you another saying. Does that make sense so far? So you're following this example. Okay, so it says the first thing we do is praise the author. So let's read the example. Isocrates said that the root of education is bitter, its fruit sweet. Okay, that's our saying. The root of education is bitter, its fruit sweet. That's the saying he's going to examine. And he says it's spoken by Isocrates. It is right to admire Isocrates for his art, for he gave it a most glorious name and proved its greatness by his practice of it. He made the art famous. He did not owe his fame to it. To go through the benefits he conferred on human life by giving laws to kings and advice to individuals would be too long. I speak only of his wise saying on education. Now, we're singing the praises of Isocrates. Isocrates' art, by the way, is rhetoric, speaking, writing. So the first thing we do is praise the author of the saying. Second thing, paraphrase the saying. What does it mean to paraphrase something? Say the same thing, but in your own words. All right, this next section. The lover of education, he says, labors at first, but those labors end in profit. That was his wise saying, and we shall show our admiration in what follows. So the root of education is bitter, its fruit sweet. What does that mean? You work hard at first, but then you profit from it later. Yes.
So we have to have a saying that we praise.
Yes. Yes. And I'm going to give you the saying. It's going to be from our book. They will be very, very similar, Kyle. And that is my burden to bear. It's okay. I'm okay with that. I will read the papers, even though they're very, very similar. Although it's gonna break out here later, and there's gonna be sometimes you guys end up picking the same things, but it's rare. So, but let's look at the next section. Causes or reasons for the saying. Why would he say that? Well, let's look. The lovers of education are enrolled with the leaders of education, whom it is fearful to approach, though to desert them is foolish. All right. He says basically, students, people who want to learn, go to teachers, leaders of education, and to approach them is fearful, to desert them is foolish. Why is it fearful? Well, those of you who read Augustine's Confessions with me last year might remember his discussion of the beatings that took place regularly in schools. This is why I always tell you guys I will not beat you. Fear always waits on boys, both when they are present and in anticipation. From teachers, the attendants take over, fearful to behold, more fearful when inflicting punishment. Fear precedes the experience, and punishment follows on fear. What the boys do wrong, they punish. What the boys do well, they take as a matter of course. Fathers are harsher than attendants, examining their ways, telling them to make progress, viewing the marketplace with suspicion. And if punishment is needed, they take no account of human nature. But by these experiences, the boy, when he reaches adulthood, is crowned with virtue. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because he actually goes on to the next section there. So why would we say this? Well, because education stinks. You get beaten all the time, And then you go home and you tell your dad you got beaten and he just beats you some more. Like, how dare you get beaten in school? We're kind of laughing, but honestly, education has been that way through much of history. The idea that if I beat you hard enough, you will learn this. No, I won't. So why say this? Because education is a severe trial. All right, the next section is a contrast. In other words, what if you do the opposite? Okay, so I'm going to take up at the same place. But if someone, because he fears these things, flees from his teachers, absconds from his parents, avoids his attendants, he is utterly deprived of eloquence. Along with his fear, he has set aside eloquence. All these things swayed Isocrates' judgment when he called the root of education bitter. All right, next up, a contrast. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the contrast. A comparison. Is there anything we can compare this to? Here's what he compares it to. For just as those who work the land laboriously sow the seed in the earth and gather the crops with greater joy, in the same way those who strive for education by their toil acquire the subsequent renown. It's like farming. We're surrounded by farmers here. It's hard work. Farmers work long hours in the spring. If any of you know people who farm, they don't have any time. They kind of don't have time right now either, but in the spring, it's really hard. If they don't do it, they will not have any harvest. They will not have money. Combines are expensive. Got to pay for that combine. You have to work hard to get the benefit. All right. Now, that's a comparison. He compared working hard in education and being difficult at first and then reaping the benefits to farming. An example is a specific person. Because this, in the past, students have said, what's the difference between a comparison and an example? A comparison is just a general situation you're comparing it to. An example is an actual person. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so here's his example. Consider Demosthenes' career, which was more devoted to toil than that of any orator and more glorious than that of any. So great was his commitment that he even deprived his head of its adornment, thinking the best adornment is that from virtue. And he devoted to toil what others devote to enjoyment. So, just a little, in case you don't know, Demosthenes was an orator in Athens. This was during the time when Philip of Macedon was encroaching on Greece, and he gave a series of speeches saying, beware of Philip, he's bad news. But Demosthenes, when he was young, stuttered. He stuttered, and they say he had a weak chest. I don't know if he had an ailment, but he had trouble, projecting his voice. And of course, there's no microphones back then. So if you want to talk to a group of people, you really got to project. And he decides he's going to be an orator, the stuttering guy with a weak voice. I'm going to be it. But they say that he shaved half of his head. He robbed, what did it say? Deprived his head of its adornment, because then he would be embarrassed to go out in public. And he shut himself in his little, man cave, his little study. And he didn't want to go out till the hair grew back, and he did nothing but practice oratory. And the fact that he was embarrassed to go out because of his hair made him stay there and just keep practicing. They say that he used to put rocks in his mouth and spoke around them to train his tongue. And then he would go down to the seashore and see if he could talk louder than the waves. And if you've ever been to the beach, it can be pretty loud at the beach when the waves get crashing in. So anyway, this man had a lot of hurdles to overcome. And he worked really, really hard to overcome them. In fact, kind of quarantined himself, sort of, so that he wouldn't want to go out. But then he's known as one of the great orators of history. So he gets the benefit. That's his example. Okay. Next up, a testimony. Testimony, you might recognize that. It's also one of our common topics. It just means, what do other people say about it? Does anyone else have something to say about this? Here's what he says. For this reason, one must admire Hesiod, who said that the road to virtue is hard, but the summit easy, expressing the same wise judgment as Isocrates. For what Hesiod represented as a road, Isocrates called the route. Both disclosed the same opinion, though in different words. So in the testimony, we say, has anyone notable or trustworthy ever said something similar to this? That worthwhile things are hard in the beginning, but bear fruit later. Or can I think of anyone else who talked about someone else who was an example of this? Yes.
So it's really interesting how they only state his saying once.
Yes.
His actual saying once, which is really like.
Because he expects you to remember, apparently, and we don't remember things very well.
Technically, he paraphrases it twice more.
Yes.
With Hesiod and
Himself.
well, yeah.
And his example at the beginning.
Yeah, literally everything about this is
So he only says it once and expects you to remember the original saying, and you can always look back. Although if he's presenting it orally, you can't just look back if you're listening to it. But you've heard the idea numerous times by the end of the speech. The idea that worthwhile things are hard at the beginning, but you work hard at it, and then you reap the benefits. Okay, the last section, as you can see, his is very short. Epilogue. Just wrap it up. His is very short. Those who consider these points must admire Isocrates for his outstandingly wise saying on education. The end. I want you to do one of these. Geoffrey of Villehardouin. I am probably butchering the name of that town he's from, but someday you will hear someone pronounce it right and you can correct yourself. He says in chapter 7, on many occasions, good people suffer because of the wicked. We will wrap up our time together on, it's in, and do you see right there? This is assignment.
Oh, yeah.
There it is. On many occasions, good people suffer because of the wicked. I feel like this seems to be Geoffrey's moral of the story. Did you notice how many times he talks about people being disloyal? These people who kept wanting to break away from the group. They wanted to disband the army and go home. They don't want to go to Venice. They want to go to another port because they can. They don't want to listen to instructions. And he said it's because of people like that that some disastrous things ensued in this very weird Fourth Crusade. I would like you in your CREA to include antithesis and parallelism. You can do it. It is. Bring it next week because this is our last time. Next week is our last time before Thanksgiving. And I'm not going to ask you to write anything for me over Thanksgiving. I know. I know. Not only do I not beat you, but I'm rescinding writing assignments. I even wrote it on my. Yeah, actually, that's a lie. I do have a writing assignment here, but I'm not giving it to you. No, I already decided I wasn't. It was a summa, but no, we're just skipping. We're skipping that one. All right. You know what? If somebody's desperate to write over Thanksgiving, I will tell you next week what it is. I'm not asking you. I am going to ask you to read something, but it's something fun. It's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And it's very preparatory for the holidays because it all takes place as Christmas approaches.
That doesn't make it a Christmas story.
He's green. Does that help?
Is the actual skin green?
What?
Is his actual skin green?
Oh, yeah.
I thought they made the Green Knight with like a green helmet or something.
That's what I was thinking.
Matthias. His horse is green. His hair is green. Skin is green. Everything's
That's
green.
really scary.
Oh, it's scary. All right. Don't tell. And if you know anything else, don't tell Matthias anything. Don't ruin it for him. Okay. So, you know what? Here it is. It's like maybe a Christmas story, but it's also right after Halloween. So it does double duty. It's creepy and Christmassy all at the same time. Okay. Enough of that. Are there any questions on that CREA? The biggest challenge is thinking of an example or a comparison. Or for some of you, it's not. Some of you just your mind goes to these things. But it's okay if it's you. The one I read to you is not very long. You don't have to go on and on and on. Maybe you won't even go on as long as as Aphthonius does. But try to search your mind. Try to think of all you can do, and be as flowery as you like. Lay it on thick if you want to, because that was the style back then. And if you want to resurrect that style, you go for it. If you're more matter of fact, that's okay. But it's sometimes hard to think of an example or testimony. But this is a pretty broad saying that good people suffer because of wicked people. I feel like there ought to be plenty of material there. All right. The Bible would be a good reference. It really would be. Okay. Was this easy to follow and read for you?
The names were French, right?
French
Out of-
names were
yeah.
kind of oh dear.
They have very long names because not only do they have a name, but they're of some place. And sometimes they're of more than one place. There's a guy who's the Marquis of something and something. And when I first read it, I thought the and was another guy. And it took me a while to realize, no, he's the Marquis of this and this. It's not the Marquis of this and another guy. He's just the Marquis of everything. So don't worry too much about the names. However, we do see Jeffrey's name several times. In fact, he's sent on several embassies. The very first one in chapter 1 that's very important, he's there. And he says at one point, I was present at all the councils that I am recounting. All the deliberation, I was in the room. I was there. This is a really valuable historical document from somebody who was there. Yeah, Alex, what did you want to say?
In the really long titles, they would separate it with not an and, but an at. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, because you have a different.
I have a different one. I mean, Mom had two things at home.
That's fine.
And I just picked one because I didn't know which one you wanted us to use, so I just read out of it.
It's fine.
And it's really interesting because they would say the Marquis of de something
At.
de something else.
Interesting. So they didn't really translate all the French and Latin titles. Did that throw you, or were you able to follow?
No, I was able to follow. I was just like, oh, that's Latin.
Yes, it is. So at the beginning in chapter 1, this is a few years before it started. Obviously, it takes some time to get thousands of people together and supplies and shipping, which is the main problem at the beginning of this section, together. But I ask you, first of all, what incentive was offered to those willing to take the cross, which means to go on crusade? Because, they would put a red cross on their tunic, right? When they are headed out to crusade. When you come back, you put it on your back, right? And often they would bring home a palm branch from the Holy Land. And so they called them palmers. Sometimes in the Canterbury Tales, you meet palmers. It's a palmer. It's a guy who's coming back from crusade and he's carrying the palm branch with him. And it's sort of, look at me, everybody, I've been on crusade. See the cross on my back? See, I've been on crusade. So that's what, take the cross. Literally, they put a cross on themselves, but also figuratively, take up your cross and follow me. And they really thought that's what they were doing. Anyway, but my question is, what was the incentive? Yeah, Ethan.
Would it be wrong to say that it was basically like martyrdom? Like, your incentive for going there is, okay, I'm going to take up my cross and I'm going to bear martyrdom.
Yes, absolutely. They are promised that if they die on crusade, they are martyrs. They have become martyrs. And of course, we still, even though we don't have people dying for their faith in the United States. We do have people beginning to suffer for their faith. Economically suffer, have legal action taken against them. And you guys are old enough for me to say, I fear this is a trend that's going to continue and something that you guys are going to have to be ready to deal with. But we don't have people being put to death because they're Christians. But in other countries, they are. People are being put to death. And we all have a reverence for martyrs. Could we all agree to that we have a reverence for martyrs? When I was a little girl, there was a book called Through Gates of Splendor. Elliot, what was his name? Elizabeth Elliot is his sister, but what was the Jim Elliot? Yes, thank you. It was in the Amazon, right? The Auca Indians. And it was the story of these 5 men. They were pilots, and they just like bush pilots, and they decided to go fly into this tribe, this jungle tribe that had no knowledge of Jesus, and they all died there. They tried to establish a rapport with them, and they did with some of them, but not all. And then one day they landed, and they just butchered them all. And this was in in the 50s or 60s. It can't be that long ago because his sister, Elizabeth Elliot, was still writing, and I don't know if she's still living. So it wasn't that long ago. And stories like that, Christians, we highly respect the people who lose their lives in the quest to spread the gospel or minister to non-Christians. And it was the same then. This is a high honor. But it was phrased a little differently. Did anyone have a different answer or a slightly different response to that first question that I asked you? It says, all those who would take the cross and serve God for a year in the army would be free from all the sins they had committed and confessed. Now, this is a Catholic doctrine. They do not totally share it with the Orthodox. trying to decide if I want to go there or not. So you might be familiar with something called an indulgence. It's talked a lot about when you talk about the Reformation, because Martin Luther was addressing indulgences, and it was an idea that and to our ears, and it does have a ring of works, but the idea was more if you're truly sorry for your sins. The idea was sorrow was involved. It became something where just money was involved. But originally sorrow was, which we're supposed to repent of our sins. We're supposed to be sorry. And it does tell us to confess them. It says, confess your sins to one another. But most of us would take this as an extreme. Really? You're just going to blanket forgive everybody's sins if you go do this? Yes, we are. There was an idea in the Middle Ages that when you die as a martyr, they would call it like baptism by blood. So even if you say you wanted to be a Christian, but you didn't have time to get baptized, but you are killed before you can officially, make a public confession of faith and be baptized, like, you're good. You're good. Your death baptizes you. God knows what your intent was. It's totally fine that you couldn't get to the font and you couldn't get to the church in time. God knows your heart, and so the stories in the early church where the Roman centurion or whatever, sees the Christians being killed, and he says, you know what? They got something real. You can count me in, and they just killed him right there. Like in the church would say, yeah, he didn't have a chance to get baptized or anything. Doesn't matter. So the idea of it being martyrdom was tied with the idea of all your sins are forgiven. This is I'm not doing a very good job of explaining it. It's much deeper than that. But that's an attractive incentive. I don't want to die when I go there, although plenty of crusaders were not afraid to die and knew that it very well may happen. But I really dig the whole sins forgiven thing. So if I can sign up for a trip that means sins forgiven, where do I sign? Yeah.
I would argue that's not necessarily the worst idea as long as you're like sorry for your sins, your sins being forgiven, and if you're not able to be baptized, but you are repentant for your sins, and you die, because martyrdom is a very humbling thing. It humbles you have to put yourself below everything. Like literally, you're falling to the ground. That's the most humbling thing that a person can do, and that humbles yourself, and puts God above you.
Yes.
Which that is something that is worthy of your sins to be forgiven. It's showing that you that you want God to be above you.
I love God so much that my life is nothing compared to that. So that is worthy. Anyway, that's what was being offered: forgiveness of sins, possible martyrdom, which will be God will have great mercy on, and also you'll be revered. When you die as a martyr. So they head out to Venice. Well, let me see what time it is. First of all, the marquis of their area that was getting them all together, of Jeffrey's area, died. And they need another, what do I say, sponsor? Someone to foot the bills, someone to organize and foot the bills. Yeah. And Jeffrey is part of the embassy. But first, he is actually chosen. It says, this is section 12 in book 1. The Count of Thibault's envoys were Geoffrey of Villehardouin, Marshal of Champagne, and then he lists the others. The counts placed all their business in the hands of these 6 envoys, and they sent them to Venice. Why Venice? Because Venice has boatloads of cash. And boats, because water. Venice was so wealthy. All the stuff from the east that got shipped in came through Venice. Venice sold goods to all of Europe and made a tidy profit on it. And so Venice was in a financial position to help. So they went to Venice and they said, hey, we want to go on crusade because we've heard that the kingdom of Jerusalem has fallen again. And, we need to send a group back there. The Third Crusade was great, with King Richard and everything, but that's old news now. We need a new crusade. And Venice made a deal with them. We will build horse transports to carry 4,500 horses and 9,000 squires, 4,500 knights, and 20,000 foot sergeants traveling in ships. Seems like a lot of ships. And we will agree to provide food for all these horses and people for 9 months. This is the minimum we would provide in return for a payment of 4 marks per horse and 2 marks per man. These terms are valid for a year from the day of our departure from the port of Venice. The total cost of what has just been outlined would amount to 94,000 marks. Now, I see there is a footnote at 94,000 marks. It does not, unfortunately, tell you any clue what that would cost today. Yeah, it says some manuscripts say 85,000 marks. This is all it tells us. Suffice it to say, it's a very large amount of money. I think we can imagine that ships for 35,000-ish people and 4,500 horses and food for 9 months for all of them, this is a fair amount. And what's more, this is Venice talking still. We will provide, for the love of God, 50 armed galleys, another 50, armed ships, cannon boats, except there's no cannons yet. But yes, that's the idea. On condition that for as long as our association lasts, we will have 1/2 of everything we capture on land or at sea, and you will have the other. 95,000 marks plus half of all the loot. They agreed to it. Jeffrey and his crew agreed to it. By the way, I got to mention this guy. The Doge of Venice was the most wise and most venerable man whose name was Enrico Dandalo. He's roughly 90 years old and blind. And he goes with them. You're a 90-year-old blind man. And, he gets them out of some scrapes, too. He's pretty awesome. But what 90-year-old blind man says, yeah, I'll go with you to the fighting. Dude, you can't see the enemy coming towards you. What? Oh my goodness. This guy is very curious to me. What? Maybe he just maybe he could hear the enemy 5 miles away. I don't know. But he went with them. All right. So now they have to decide how they might obtain ships and a fleet. All right. Now, the next couple of chapters are dealt with this, but what problem crops up when they start gathering at Venice? I ask you, what problem did the Crusaders gathered at Venice encounter? We've made a deal. Venice is building ships. They're gathering supplies. We're all showing up. We got weapons. We got horses. What do we not have? Oh, we don't have any money. We have no money. Okay, so I want to see if I didn't ask you this question, and I know it was a lot of material to ask you to remember, but people kept doing something that Jeffrey won't let go. He keeps talking about it, and he says, this is the problem. What did groups of people do that made it impossible for those in Venice to gather the money? Do you remember? They went to different cities. I don't like Venice. Venice isn't pretty this time of year. Let's go to Marseille. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go down down on the French Riviera. I like if they don't all gather in the same place, they can't pool their money. The other people are going to have to hire ships and spend money. Meanwhile, the people who actually obeyed the instructions, they were told, they were strongly encouraged to go to Venice. We already hired ships. We have already made a deal with these people. Don't go somewhere else. And I asked you last week to look at, and so Alex, and if you have a different translation, it might be a different word occasionally. But he talks a lot about people being disloyal. He says, here, he gave an order that each man who received some of this money should swear on relics to commit themselves to the army formed at Venice, as he himself had promised to do. Many of those men did not uphold this oath. The Marquis gave them money for expenses, traveling expenses to Venice, and then they just went somewhere else. Again, at the beginning of chapter 2, it says the Count of Flanders and the pilgrims set great store by it, the fleet, since the majority of their valued sergeants departed with this fleet. It's another fleet. But they did not keep the promise they had made to their Lord and all the other pilgrims, because these men, like many others, were afraid of the great danger that the army gathered at Venice had undertaken to face. So there's also a current, I'll read several times as we go through. If I start searching, I'll lose my place and I won't ever find what I want. But he mentions several times, my train of thought. Say again what you said, Kirsten. You can help me.
Oh, they signed it so they could get their sins forgiven and then
Yeah.
skipped.
There's disloyalty and I can't remember. It'll come back. So now we will leave these men aside to tell you about the pilgrims, of whom a large number had already arrived at Venice. Count Baldwin at Flanders had already come, along with many others. News reached them that there were large numbers of pilgrims that had taken other routes to other ports. And this prompted great concern because they would not be able to keep their side of the treaty or pay the money they owed to the Venetians. We don't have enough people. It says the barons did not have even half the sum they needed. They don't even have half the money. They're going around taking collections in the camp. Hey, you got any precious jewels? And you got anything? Got anything worth money? Throw it in the bowl. We need it. We need it. Oh, and it came back to me. There were also people, Jeffrey tells us this over and over, that wanted the army to disband. Did you notice several times he would say, these are the ones who wanted to disband the army. In other words, this is how I thought of it. We already signed up. We technically went, sort of, but now we just want to go home. We don't like the sound of this. Look, everybody, I went on crusade. I went all the way to Venice. I went all the way to, southern France. But now let's go home. They wanted the army to disband. And so some of these people, I don't know why they signed up in the first place, probably peer pressure and pressure from your lord. If you're the vassal of someone, and you have to go. They didn't want to go, why they signed up. But they're trying to get people to give money. And Jeffrey says there were people there with plenty of money. They didn't give any of it because they were hoping they wouldn't be able to meet the expenses and they would just go home. I know. Yeah, Rhett.
I found online this a German mark, which I don't think
Oh,
is
mhm.
right, but then it said something else that one mark was like 54 cents and it would add up to like 50 grand or something. I really don't think
Yeah.
Like,
Would that be like marks today?
Yeah, currently, there is a mark used by Bosnia.
Yeah.
And Germany.
So it's hard to tell. Yeah.
Maybe a little different because of inflation and just the difference of
I mean, I don't know how many people or horses you can put on a single ship, but we're talking 35,000 people and 4,500 horses. I don't know how many ships that is, how much it costs. But I mean,
That's a few
I'm
years.
thinking this is a very large sum of money. Do you know what I mean? But thank you for looking that up.
And if I put like one from Venice,
1,200.
Yeah.
yeah.
You could probably Google this. Somebody, if you want to say, I mean, like,
There's no conversion.
put in something like, put in this particular thing. How much would, I mean, don't do it now. But because it would be a lot of words. And my husband says I Google search too many. You don't know how to Google search, says my husband. And it's probably true. But like I would put, Jeffrey, sack of Constantinople, Venice fleet, equivalent today, or something like that. I mean, you can if you want to, Rhett. But that's a lot of, and it might not bring anything up. It says they still lacked 34,000 marks when they basically squeezed everybody for everything they could get. All right. Yes. By the way, he mentions again about the people. This is the fault of those who went to other ports. I'm going to zip up to chapter 6. And he says, just to kind of finish their story, now we will leave the men before Constantinople and tell you instead about those men who had gone to other ports than Venice, and those with the Flemish fleet that had spent the winter at Marseille before all its ships crossed to Syria in the summer. There were so many of them that they far outnumbered those outside Constantinople. Now you will hear what harm was done when these men did not join that force. Had they done so, Christendom would have been forever exalted. But because of their sins, God did not wish this to happen. Some of them died as a result of the sickly climate in Syria, and others went back to their own countries. None of them ever achieved anything noteworthy or useful in the lands they visited. They were a dead end. Okay, so they lack money. Jeffrey says, but God, who gives hope to the hopeless, did not wish this to happen, the army to break up. And this is the next question. What two offers or arrangements helped them out of their difficulty? Two things got offered to them. The old blind doge is sitting there and saying, we could cut you a deal. Yeah, Alex.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. I thought that the offer was that the Doge will give you a fleet if you pay.
Oh, no. Okay, so you know what? I did this better yesterday. My kids yesterday started reading this, and I gave them basically the outline of the story. Because it is easy. I forget that for you guys, you're buried in a sea of names. First thing that happens, the Doge says, here's the deal, guys. Y'all got horses and armor, and you're ready to fight, and we have a little problem. We have a city, Zara, and they belong to us. They were tributary of us, and the king of Hungary has captured Zara. It's just across. I'm sorry, I didn't bring my. I'm doing it. So here's Italy, it's Sicily, whatever. Okay. And then, it goes up, and then Venice is up here somewhere. And then it comes back down, and it's Greece, right? Greece is crazy, and it has the little strip of, okay. All right. We're just going to stop there. It sort of looks like internal organs or something. So it's just, they just need to go not very far. It's sort of like the water goes up here, and they just need to cross over. It's not very far away. The king of Hungary has taken it. It's a short, quick trip. And he says, if you will go take that city back for us, we will forgive you part of what you owe us. You can pay it off in service instead of cash. Just go over there and tell those people what's what and make sure they obey us. And problem, Zara is a Christian city. It's a city of fellow Christians that the Doge is asking them to go attack. So they have a little conference about that, the advisability of just willy-nilly going off and attacking fellow Christian cities. But they said, look, we're in a tough place. They built these ships and we got no money. We got to pay them somehow. We have to do it. So they agree to do it. Before we go to the other offer, let's follow up that story, okay? They go to this city and set up siege operations around it, undermined the wall. In this way, the town was surrendered to the authority of the Venetian Doge, and the lives of the inhabitants spared. The Doge came to the counts and barons and said to them, "My lords, we have captured this city through God's grace and your own. Winter has come, and we won't be able to set out from here till Easter. The city is very rich and well stocked with all we might need. Let's divide the town in two, one half for us and the other for you." The Venetians and the French divide Zara in two. How the inhabitants of Zara feel about this, we are not told, but I'm guessing they're not really overjoyed that this entire huge army is going to be eating their food all winter. But the clincher, and I didn't notice this till yesterday, at the beginning of chapter 4, it says, in the spring, they get ready to go. When the ships were loaded on the day after Easter, the pilgrims set up camp outside the town by the port, while the Venetians razed the city to the ground, along with its towers and walls. They flattened that city for not staying faithful to Venice.
That seems a little extreme.
This is the first accomplishment of the Fourth Crusade.
Mind you, this is a Christian city.
Oh yeah. And the Pope said, what are you doing? I thought we were sending you off to fight Muslims. What are you doing? They're like, well, I don't know. They did send later. Jeffrey tells us they sent ambassadors to the Pope to kind of apologize. And he said, well, yeah, I know you were in a bind. I mean, yeah. So this is the first thing that happened. Second offer. Now I have to tell a long story. Oh no, it's fun. Do you like my stories? Once upon a time, there was an emperor in Constantinople, and his wicked, evil brother took the throne from him and threw him in prison and gouged his eyes out. It's always bad. And threw the emperor's son in there, the usurper's nephew, right? The true emperor and his son got thrown in prison. The son, Alexius, escapes from prison. He runs off to Europe, where his sister is married to the Prince of Germany or something. She's married to somebody important. He was king of Germany, some important guy. And he says, what are we going to do? My dad is blind and in prison, and my uncle is a dirty, rotten scoundrel, and I need help. And his brother-in-law says, well, yes, you do. I don't really want to help you because that sounds dangerous. But there's a whole crowd of crusaders gathered at Venice, so I hear. And I think they're having some difficulties. Go send a messenger to them and check it out, see if they can help you. So he does. And he says, okay. My lords, I am sending you my wife's brother, and in so doing, this is to an ambassador, I place him in the hands of God. May he save the young man from death and in yours. Since you have left home in the cause of God, right, and justice, you should, if you are able, restore their inheritance to those who have been wrongly dispossessed. And Alexius will offer you the most favorable terms ever offered to anyone and give you the greatest possible assistance in conquering the land overseas. First, if God permits you to restore him to his inheritance, he will place the entire empire of Romania in obedience to Rome. He's offering a huge chunk of the Byzantine Empire to Rome, to allegiance to the Roman Catholic Church, from which it was formally cut off. Second, he understands that you have spent your own money and that you are now poor. Therefore, he will give you 200,000 marks of silver and provisions for the whole army, both the great men and the lesser. He will also go with you in person to the land of Egypt, accompanied by 10,000 men, or he will send them at his expense if you think that would be better. He will provide you with such service for 1 year, and throughout his life he will maintain 500 knights in the land overseas supported with his own money. It's a dream come true. Yes. Oh, okay. We good? It's not bad, but well, I'll just read it instead of telling you.
It's like, I really, really want.
Yeah, that's a lot to offer, isn't it? When you don't have it technically.
Like, please, please.
On
I'll
the
send troops. I'll send more money. Please.
Yeah. And when you get it, will you change your mind? This is the question. Well, so they hear this. They have another meeting. Many views were expressed. The Cistercian abbot of Vaux, along with those who wanted the army to disband, spoke. They said they could not agree to this at all, for they would be campaigning against Christians. This was certainly not what they had set out to do. They wanted to go to Syria instead. And so the army was in discord. At this point, the Marquis Boniface of Montferrat, who's the guy who is Geoffrey's liege, the guy told you at the beginning, their lord died and they found another guy to step in and take his place. They said, Marquis and others, said they would support the treaty. It would be dishonorable to refuse it. Then they went to the Doge's residence. The King of Germany, it is the King of Germany's envoys, were summoned, and the leaders of the army confirmed the agreement. All right. So they spend the winter at Zara. Unfortunately, this is what life is like in Zara. On the third day after they had taken up their lodgings in Zara, a great calamity struck the army around the hour of vespers. A fight broke out between some of the Venetians and the French. A very widespread and very fierce one. Men were running to arms throughout the city, and the commotion was so great that there were few streets where there was not intense fighting with swords, lances, crossbows, and bolts. Many people were wounded and killed. Oh my goodness. I mean, they're only just across from Venice now, sacking the city that they're now going to level to the ground in the spring. Yes. Goodness. All right. $12 million. They just signed, yes, we will pay you $12 million. Oh, yeah, and half the loot. Like, they're not even going to recoup it all from.
They sound like the U.S. being in debt.
Honestly, there's probably even more than that.
80 trillion.
The farthest I could go back with like inflation was like 1700.
Wow.
So that was.
So it's just,
billions.
yeah, it's just an enormous sum of money. So that's the thing. But after you agree to it, you're bound. And so when somebody says, hey, if you will go attack this city for me, I'll forgive some of your debt. If you will go help me regain the throne, I'll forgive some of your debt. You can see why they take it. They're desperate. I don't know what Venice would do to them, if they didn't pay up. I don't know what legal recourse Venice has against a group of crusaders who just say, sorry, we don't have it. I mean, they'd keep the ships, obviously. I don't know what would have happened. Yes, and the money already given. But they finally, so they level Zara and they head out to Constantinople. Now, I think I mentioned this before. In the West, I mean, there were beautiful things. This is before, they're building cathedrals and there's beautiful cities, but Constantinople was just amazing. It was so rich and so beautiful. And people who had never seen it were just in awe. So this is Geoffrey's description of the first view. Now, you may be assured that those who had never seen Constantinople before gazed at it for a long time, barely believing there was such a great city in all the world. They saw its high walls and mighty towers with which the city was completely encircled, as well as the fine palaces and impressive churches, of which there were so many that none could believe it if he did not see it with his own eyes. And they could be seen the length and breadth of the city, which is the sovereign of all others. Know that there was no man there so bold that his flesh did not tremble, which should come as no surprise, for never was such a great project undertaken by as many men since the creation of the world. Geoffrey likes to embellish a little bit. There's lots of this since the beginning of the world there was never such a. All right. They camped. I feel like before you guys came in, I was looking at the maps I gave you in the back. No, I didn't give. I gave the junior high kids maps in the back. Never mind. Yeah, I'm not going to try to embarrass myself with another map. The Constantinople. Here's the Black Sea, and there's two little straits with sort of a Sea Marmora in between that lead out to the Mediterranean. And Constantinople is on one of those little pieces of land that sticks out, and right across the bay is a town called Chalcedon. And that's where the Crusaders took up. They were sort of across a body of water, but within sight. Okay, and skirmishes ensue. Interestingly, they bring Alexius out. Their idea is we will bring the rightful ruler and say, look, here's your rightful ruler. Don't you want to get rid of the dirty, rotten usurper? Not a single person of that land or of that country gave any sign that they sided with the young prince out of fear and dread of the Emperor Alexius. So the galleys turned back to the camp and each man went to his quarters. Okay, I was looking into this a little bit. Apparently, nobody in Constantinople really liked Alexius and his dad very much anyway. There may have been reasons why people didn't come out and say, yay, it's the true ruler. They're like, we don't want him. Yeah, there was no real outcry in the city of, yes, we're going to join these people and drive out the usurper. So they start landing. Jeffrey says, no, that no one ever made such an audacious landing. Ever. Yes. Well, that was, he can be forgiven not comparing it to that because a little bit of time issue. So they sit down in front of Constantinople and they just set up a siege. No one could go in search of food more than 4 crossbow shots away from the camp. This is the besiegers, not the besieged, because the Greeks keep coming out of the city and attacking them. No one could go in search of food, and supplies were very low. They had a little flour and bacon, but no fresh meat except from the horses that were killed. They're eating their horses. You should know that the food available throughout the camp only amounted to a 3-week supply. This was the most perilous situation, since never in any city had so many people been besieged by so few. They decide to attack because how long can we? Within 3 weeks. Are we with me in the corner back there? Oh, no. Okay, nice throwing Matthias under the bus, but okay, don't kick. And don't have a little conversation. I may have to relocate Alice and Ella if we can't stop having conversation. Matthias, I just look at his face. He looks so innocent. All right. I didn't really say he was innocent. I said he had an innocent face. Not really the same thing. But they decide they've got 3 weeks food. So we're just going to put scaling ladders. We're just going to climb the walls. Notice who's fighting. I don't know if this stood out to you. They set 2 scaling ladders against a barbican near the sea. The walls were heavily defended by English and Danish men.
What?
I know. And the assault was good and strong and hard. Okay, what are these English and Danish? Okay, the Danish. I just want to say it, but I don't want to just say it. What group of people are highly known for leaving Scandinavia and running around causing trouble? What do we call those people? Vikings. They're Vikings. Vikings? Oh, man, I wish I had my map. All right, you're just going to pretend. This is my map, all right? You're just pretending. Here's Scandinavia. Well, I got it. You guys are smart. You've got a map in your head, and the North Sea, and you come across to like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. You got where I am. And there's rivers. The Vikings traveled these rivers into what is now Russia. In fact, did we have this talk already about Russians looking different? Did we ever notice that Russians look European? They're not Asian looking. Even though Russia, it goes all the way into these. Russians are not of Asian genetic material. They're European. What? These Vikings came and they headed to Russia, and they had, the blonde Vikings with their rosy cheeks, and they called them the Rus. The people there said these Rus are coming from their red, we don't know exactly why, but probably from their reddish, rosy complexion. This is where Russia gets its name. From these Scandinavian travelers. They go down rivers, they head to the Black Sea, they show up at Constantinople. They can't sack Constantinople. I mean, they're Vikings and they're awesome, but they're not that awesome. But the emperor sees that this group of highly trained fighting men is showing up, and he says, "Hey, you want a job? I like your style. How about you be my personal guard?" The emperor in Constantinople had a Viking guard, a Scandinavian guard, the Varangian guard. They're Danish. They're Vikings. Yes.
So they migrated up to Russia. It's very interesting. One thing I did some reading from a different study. The Alaskans we know now, like the Alaskan natives, the Eskimos, came from Russia. Russia, the migration was from Russia, and a little more west down to Alaska. Actually,
the Bering Strait was a land bridge there. It was frozen over.
And that's how Native Americans got here.
Yes.
And before, yes, a lot, but without us even anybody knowing.
So the migrations in the mists of time, lead to some really interesting results. And one of them is the fact that when these guys show up at Constantinople, there are Danish defenders and English defenders. What are English people doing there? Well, yeah, you win.
Somebody mixed up their action figures. Like you got a bunch of Vikings and British people fighting the Crusaders.
William the Conqueror. When William the Conqueror took England in 1066, it really stunk to be English. The Normans were the overlords. They were the ones with the power and the cash. The Angles and the Saxons, who had once been, on top because they're beating down the Celts, they're now on the low end. And I remember, Jonathan, I was telling you about this because I always pull this out whenever possible. I've probably done this with several of you. For example, this is why the animal's called a cow, but the food is called beef. The animal's called a pig, but the food is called pork. Because cow and pig are Saxon words, and beef and pork are French, Norman, Latin words. In other words, the idea being who's taking care of the actual animal, low-class Saxons, pigs and cows. Who's eating them? The upper crust Normans who call it beef and pork, and so this is why, but chicken is chicken. I don't understand why chicken doesn't have a special name. I feel like chicken needs a new name. We should work on that. But so it's terrible to be an Angle in England after William. What are you going to do? But first, we're going to let Matthew tell us. They were. It's all the Vikings' fault. Again, yes, at Stamford Bridge. They'd been up there fighting, and then they had to hightail it down. So a lot of English immigrated. They left. There was a guy, I think his name is Norman. I can't ever remember. Like English were taking over Sicily. There was a guy, Norman or Robert. I'm sorry. They spread out, and they were basically adventurers. I have no good career path left to me in England because the Normans have everything. So where shall I go? Oh, let's go look for another job. Hey, Constantinople. That's an awesome place to live. So English adventurers also had shown up and were there. Do you want to say something? So anyway, it just kind of interesting. And we put our ladders up to the wall, and the English and Danes were fighting because they were the crack troops for Constantinople. These English and Danish armies, Viking armies. Finally, though, they took the city. And yes, I asked this question. How did Emperor Isaac regain the throne? I guess I just told you. Because what did I just say? What words just came out of my mouth? They took the city. The Crusaders conquered. The emperor. Okay, this is confusing. The boy who came to get help is named Alexius. His uncle is also named Alexius. All right. His dad's name's Isaac, but his uncle is Alexius. So it says, now heed the miracles of our Lord, all of which are beautiful, wherever he chooses to perform them. That very night, Emperor Alexius of Constantinople took what he could carry of his treasure and set off, abandoning the city. He just left the city to them. So I see that we are our time, so I'm going to zip ahead. They came before the old blind Isaac and said, "This is what your son promised." And he said, "That's a lot. You really promised a lot. I don't know if we can do that." But in the end, he agreed. He agreed, okay, I will abide by what my son said. In the meantime, a couple of very bad things happened. First of all, there was very great discord, he says, from those in the army who wanted it to disband. We're done. Let's go home.
Two Christian cities.
Yes, we've sacked 2 Christian cities. We've done here.
Any Muslim.
Young Alexius, goes out to solidify support. He's doing a tour of the countryside, basically. While he's gone, this was the next question I asked you. A large brawl broke out between the Greeks and the Latin residents of the city, of which there were a large number. I do not know which group wickedly set fire to the city, but the blaze was so widespread and intense that no one could put it out or bring it under control. The fire lasted for a week. And it says, and Jeffrey's he says this, and then he says the next comment. None of the Latins who had been resident inside Constantinople, no matter where they came from, dared stay in the city any longer. I guess not. Because the residents of the city are hopping mad at you. You just burnt down our city. Jeffrey tells us there's a series of 3 fires. And this is the last question. No, it's not the last question I asked you. Oh, shoot. So, having settled his affairs very effectively, the emperor believed he was no longer dependent on the barons and began to act haughtily towards them. He made meager, paltry payments from time to time, but in the end they dwindled to nothing. The Crusaders came to the emperor Alexius. Now, his dad Isaac has passed on. You promised. They sent an embassy. It says they've called on you to do so, pay up, numerous times. And we call on you on their behalf in the presence of your own barons to satisfy the terms of the agreement in place between you and them. If you do so, they will be very pleased. If you do not do so, you should know that from this time forward, they will not regard you as their lord or as their friend. Instead, they will recover what is owed to them by whatever means are necessary. Oh, yeah. They took Constantinople. The Crusaders started a war and took Constantinople. Inside Constantinople, they don't even like Alexius. Another usurper comes, throws Alexius in prison, and has him murdered. And the Crusaders say that anyone who committed such a murder had no right to possess lands. Those people are so wicked, they don't deserve Constantinople. Not to mention, above all this, the Greeks had withdrawn from obedience to Rome. The church is not in communion with the Bishop of Rome. They're a bunch of rotters who kill their own people. They don't pay their bills. They burned Constantinople. They stole everything they could get their hands on. Then you might have seen Greeks being struck down and horses and palfreys seized along with he-mules, she-mules, and other booty. There were so many dead and wounded that they were endless and innumerable. Many of the great men of Greece turned and fled towards the gate of Blachernae. The hour of vespers had already passed, and the men of the army were wearied by battle and killing. They began to gather in the great square inside Constantinople. This is the culmination of this this campaign. There's a third fire. Yes. And then he says, and then, okay, I'm going to read to you just briefly something from another historian, okay? But even Jeffrey is admitting this. He said, then they started grabbing everything they could. It says, some were honest in presenting their spoils because they're going to pool their resources, you know? Others deceitful. Greed, which is the root of all evil, knew no restraint. From that time forward, greedy people started to hoard things for themselves, and our Lord started to love them less. Oh God, they had behaved so loyally up to that point. And Lord God had demonstrated that in all their affairs, he had honored and exalted them over all other people. But on many occasions, good people suffer because of the wicked. Now, even Jeffrey admits, we burned it down and people were just snatching. But this is an Arab, this is an Eastern view, all right? Ibn al-Athir writes that during the 3-day sack of the city, the Crusaders killed priests, bishops, and monks and destroyed churches. The altars were stripped, icons smashed apart, jewels pried out of sacred vessels, relics stolen. The eyewitness Nicholas Messarites tells us that in their greed, the Crusaders stripped women to, quote, see whether a feminine ornament or gold was fastened to the body or hidden in them. They slaughtered the newborn, killed matrons, stripped elder women, and outraged old ladies. They tortured the monks, they hit them with their fists and kicked their bellies, thrashing and rending their reverend bodies with whips. Men were dragged like sheep and beheaded, and on the holy tombs, the wretched slew the innocent. Yeah, I mean, it goes on, but I'm not, that's enough. It's a horrible blot in history. And the Orthodox Church, people in the East still remember. There's been movement, and I think we come from different faith traditions in this room, but we all can agree to one thing, and it is that the church was never supposed to be split up into little bits. Jesus was very clear, they should be one as we are one, he said to the Father, and we are not. We are not, and this is an evil in the church. But so there have been, movements. The Pope met with the Patriarch of Constantinople, but they remember. It's really, it's 800 years ago. I get it. But this is just a stumbling block between the East and the West, really being back in communion and being one church again. The fact that this was done to their churches in their city. There's an amazing influx of relics in the West after this because they stole them. They just stole them, and they shipped all the relics from Constantinople and put them in churches in the West. But you notice that we are not done with this book. This seems, okay, you took Constantinople. Now, what are you going to do with it? And let me read one more thing. I know I put a note to myself. Okay. They held a conference. This is before they took it to decide how to proceed. The conclusion of the meeting was that if God granted them entry to the city by force, all the booty seized should be gathered together. If they took control of the city, 6 Frenchmen and 6 Venetians would be chosen to swear on the relics that they would elect an emperor who was the man they believed to be of greatest benefit to the land. In other words, are they going to turn Constantinople back over to the people in the East? Or are they going to rule it themselves? They said they're going to elect an emperor. They're going to divide it up. They're taking over. The next 7 chapters, I think it's 7 more, finish the conquest of Constantinople for next week. How are they managing things? And how did the people in the East like it? That Western Catholic Christians have taken over their churches, have destroyed their precious city, have murdered countless people in the streets, stolen from them. Are they just going to sit down and take it? Or are they going to fight back? Read and see. Because the story is not over yet. I will tell you, though, that there are going to be Western rulers in Constantinople for a whole generation. The guy in charge of Constantinople is some Western European guy. He's not an emperor. He's not. They just took it. They just took it. It's an ugly episode in history, but we have an amazing amount of information about it because this guy was there. He is a fan. I mean, he's on the French side, and he flat out says people who blind and murder their rulers and throw them in prison don't deserve what they have. I don't know. You can think about that. Do the French get to make that decision? Jeffrey seems to think God is making that decision. He keeps saying, God willed it. God willed it. God arranged it, that we took the city, and this happened and that happened, and it was God's doing. He doesn't have a problem with taking away from people that he thinks are undeserving. But I'm not sure if he was allowed to make that decision, you know. So anyway, finish it. Write a creia on good people suffer because of the wicked. And I will see you next week for our last meeting before Thanksgiving break. Bye, guys.
We are assuming the statement is true.
What?